Hello, my fellow citizens. Welcome to the show. Starship Troopers, written in 1959 by Robert A. Heinlein. I've had this book in my library for, I don't remember how long. Suffice to say, I've read it quite a few times. You can tell by how much it's falling apart in places. I'm going to need to go get a new copy one of these days. This book is a cornerstone of not only military science fiction, but sci-fi in general. It's a story that largely popularized powered armor as a concept. So everything from Iron Man to 40K Space Marines. To say it's been influential is an understatement. Now, of course, if you ask the average person on the street about Starship Troopers, chances are good that if they know anything, it'll be the 1997 movie adaptation directed by Paul Verhoeven. This shouldn't be a surprise. Way more people know Lord of the Rings from Peter Jackson than from Tolkien nowadays. It is what it is. And for good or for ill, especially depending on your opinion on the flick, it's had an impact going forward. You look at anything Starship Troopers related from the late 90s onward, and the visual iconography and reference points will be from the movie. The sequels, obviously, but also the video games, tabletop stuff, the memes. Gods. Oh boy, the memes. One thing you could say about Verhoeven's flick is that it was very memeable. That's for damn sure. The Roughnecks cartoon, Starship Troopers Chronicles from 1999, did better, bringing in more stuff from the book, like, the skinnies and things like that. But even then, it's still firmly in that vein. It's also a really good show, by the way, so, look it up. And also the two Shinji Aramaki CGI sequels, way better than the shitty live-action ones. Take my word for it. Yeah, Invasion and Traitor of Mars. Those ones, well worth checking out. This all leads me back to this actually, conveniently leads me back to what I actually want to talk about today, because the 97 movie is not the only time this book was brought to the screen. Back in 1988, Sunrise, the company that would eventually become Bandai Namco Filmworks, produced a 6-episode anime of Starship Troopers titled, and forgive my pronunciation, it's not going to get any better going forward, Uchu no Senshi. Literally, I think Space Warrior is the actual, literal translation. It was a miniseries that directed by Tetsuro Amino and released on Laserdisc between October and December of '88. Sadly, Heinlein himself died in May of that very year and never got to see the finished series. The first episode opening with a dedication to the man, so, kudos on that. So, let's get this one out of the way right now. There has never been a perfect adaptation of Starship Troopers, and this one certainly isn't. Although in different ways from the Verhoeven film. Although they're actually similar in other ways. For one thing, Rico isn't Filipino in either one. Which, it's right there on the cover. I mean, he only gets mentioned as such in the final chapter as kind of like a reveal to the audience, but still, it'd be nice to eventually get the guy to actually look Filipino one of these days. I mean, his real full name is Juan Johnny Rico. Anyway, it's a minor point. See, anyway, what was I going on about? Yeah. See, the book is basically made up of two parts. There's the coming-of-age story of Johnny Rico joining the mobile infantry, going through boot camp, and then to war against the Arachnids after they attack Earth. And there's also the political and philosophical musings on the Terran Federation's form of stratocratic republicanism. That's the part that gets people into flame wars, and has for decades now, and the part that Verhoeven decided was worthy of satire via a debatedly successful Hugo Boss paint job. There's been enough talk about that going forward. There's plenty of other people who've done way longer videos than I'm willing to do on just that subject. So, go check them out. So, on the other hand, the anime here we're talking about skips that part completely. There's no mockery or even mention of anything of that, socio-political stuff from the book. There's nothing on the historic collapse of democracy, citizens and civilians, the distinction between those, restricted franchise. No service guarantees citizenship, although that line's from the movie, not the book, so it makes sense. None of that. The focus is entirely on Johnny's journey through basic training, culminating with the Battle of Klendathu in the final 6th episode. Another way the anime differs is that it only covers up to chapter 10 of the book, leaving out all the rest of the second half, where Johnny decides to go career, becomes an officer, and eventually actually reunites with his dad, who doesn't die in the book, because his mom, the thing is, in the book, they don't actually live in Buenos Aires. His mom was traveling there when the bugs attacked, and that's why she passed away there during that whole massacre. Eventually, his dad, out of a sense of, possibly revenge, possibly a sense of, realizing that his son had the right idea, joins up into the mobile infantry. By the end of the book, he's actually his platoon sergeant after Johnny makes second lieutenant. That is, nice little progression right there. And it's a shame this stuff isn't in the anime, because I would have liked to see how they deal with all this stuff. That would have been interesting. What this does mean, however, is that we get a much bigger focus on Rico's time in basic, and this is where the anime really captures that aspect of the book, where so much of it, again, the whole first half really, is him learning to become a soldier, building up that esprit de corps, learning to rely on his brothers in arms, losing some to discharge from the army, and even death on occasion, although obviously it's done through an 80s anime lens, so bear that in mind. One of the things that's interesting is they'll often expand small offhand mentions, like how in chapter 9 of the book here, Rico briefly notes how he helped with a forest fire near the base during training, and that turns into an entire scene in the second episode of the anime. It also includes things that weren't there in the 97 movie, like Private Hendricks taking a swing at Sergeant Zim. And there's also Rico and a fellow soldier getting to a bar brawl with some hoods while on leave, so that's a fun little bit too. And of course, the big thing that wasn't included in the Verhoeven movie and is here, the MI's Marauder-powered armor, the thing that this book really helped popularize again. These things are a great depiction of what Heinlein described in the book, not only visually, but also functionally. The designs actually originated way before this series in 1975, when two illustrators and mechanical designers from Studio New, the people who did, what was it called, the Starship Yamato, that anime, I forget the full name. Their names were Katsutaka Miyatake and Naoyuki Kato, again, apologies for the pronunciation, who did some illustrations based on the book for SF Magazine, again in 1975, and then came back in 1979 to provide both the illustrations and cover art for the Japanese edition of Starship Troopers, the actual book. Then, in 88, Sunrise, decided to do this anime and brought in Katsutaka Miyatake on board for the series to design the suits, and, well, here we are. Now, both these guys have done some seriously great work over the years. Katsutaka's done everything from Macross to the recent Armored Core 6. He was one of the mechanical designers for the mechs on that. And Noyuki did concept and mechanical design work for what I consider one of the best animes of all time, Legend of the Galactic Heroes. That is a personal favorite. You owe it to yourselves to watch that one, seriously. For Starship Troopers, they deliberately went for a far more practical, realistic style than what was common for mecha at the time. Remember, the original Mobile Suit Gundam series won't be out on Japanese TV until April of 1979. So this book and the images that these two guys made had a really massive impact, and definitely got the ball rolling on what would become the real robot genre in mecha. And from there, we got everything from Battletech and Heavy Gear and all sorts of other stuff. As for the OVA, it's got everything you want. It's got, the actual proportions of the armor, the long arms where the pilot's arms are actually inside the forearms, controlling things with the actual suit's arm extending forward. That and the posture makes it look, as Heinlein described, as a big metal gorilla. Which is that you got the jump jet verniers, allowing them to move on the bounce, just blasting off and just bouncing around, shooting all the way. You got the flamers, nuclear rocket launcher. You got the Y-rack on the shoulders, firing off grenades as they jump around, which is nice. You got the whole drop from orbit in re-entry capsules, which is why the mobile infantry is referred to as cap troopers. Something else that we didn't have in the movie, in the 97 movie. It was in the Roughnecks cartoon, though. The first episode, they do a full, orbital drop, which is cool. Oh, and they also, the little things too is like they even show them like switching things on and off with their chin, just like it's described in the novel, because since you're in this huge hulking armor like that, you can't exactly flip switches. So the only part you have of your body that's still able to move independently is your head. So literally in the novel, it's actually described as switching things on and off with your chin in between, as you're doing everything else. And here it's actually shown there. And funny enough, this is something I noticed watching again for this review. They have these fold-out machine guns that they draw as one of their major common sidearms. And if you look at it, it actually is the same weapon that would eventually inspire the disposable pack gun that's used in Heavy Gear. So it's just like one of those little references that unless you're a fan of both these properties, you wouldn't necessarily notice. When you get to see these things in action pretty often, especially during training as the recruits are learning how to pilot them, and you get to see exactly how difficult these things are to operate for newbies. And then you get to see the people who are actually used to them, all their superiors just jumping around and just like moving without a care in the world. It's like it's a second skin. And they're just like, God damn it, how am I supposed to do this? There's moments where they're training on both the moon and on Mars where, dealing with the lower gravity and stuff like that. Learning how to use the jump jets and accidentally just shooting themselves off into the stratosphere for a second. Oof. And you do get those mentions that, like, we don't care what happens to you. These things are worth more than you are, so bring them back in one piece. Those kind of lines from there's drill sergeants and there's officers. The whole thing culminates, again, as I said, with Episode 6 from the assault on Klendathu, which is just all-out war, with Rico and the rest of the MI unleashing full scope of their arsenal against all these aliens, just wreaking utter havoc on everything. Everything just blows up everywhere. It's great. Now, I say aliens, you probably noticed, rather than bugs, because this brings us to another big difference from the book. In Heinlein's novel, the arachnids are a technologically advanced insectoid species with ray guns and spaceships of their own. They have FDL travel and stuff like that. They're a hive mind kind of species that he's described as, a perfect communist society, which, considering Heinlein, that was not a compliment. The aliens, of course, you have the aliens in the bugs in Verhoeven's film, which are, far nowhere near as technologically adept, obviously, and almost more biotechnology in their own regard. The warriors in Verhoeven's flick are basically engineered from birth to rip and tear everything that gets in their way. Now, the aliens in the OVA, on the other hand, they don't have the technology, and in many ways closer to Verhoeven's bugs in that regard, but they're also, they're really fucking weird. Is all I'm going to say about that. Instead of being like spider or insect-like, they're these strange, pinkish, octopus, jellyfish-looking things with big yellow lidless eyes and great big double beaks that spit these lethal blasts of plasma at their enemies. Again, kind of like some of the bugs in Verhoeven's film movie. I have to wonder if maybe Ed Neumeier, the guy who wrote to the script for that, had ever watched this anime, because there's a couple of things that are very similar. Like, Johnny's a football guy, a high school football guy in both versions. So that's interesting, right? A little coincidence right there. Anyway, they're just as hostile to humanity as any of the other versions of these things, able to fuse together into these huge fleshy masses that can either, attack like freaking artillery barrages or travel through space unaided. They use spores for covert insertions and to infiltrate ships. And while they don't have any technology of their own by the looks of it, at least, not any we recognize, they're evidently intelligent and they're able to commandeer it at the very least. It's best exemplified by when they infiltrate a starship called the Queen Alexandria on its way back to Earth, land it in Buenos Aires, you can see where I'm going with this, and then unleash a sneak attack that ends up slaughtering near 1 million people, Rico's mom included. In the novel, they use one of their own warships, and obviously in Verhoeven's version, it's a big-ass meteor. I have no idea why they decided to go for this particular look for the aliens rather than the book version, but it's certainly unique. You gotta give them credit for that. Beyond that, the visual style is obviously that of an 80s anime, as is the soundtrack, so no Basil Polidorus here, unfortunately, which is, obviously a shame, because, it's hard to top that. If there's one thing that Verhoeven knew what to do is get Basil Polidorus to do the soundtrack for his movie. Chef kiss there. I will say, I like the fact that nobody has the stereotypical spiky, weird colored anime hair, shit like that. Everyone is drawn and proportioned realistically, which is the style I honestly prefer for, my anime, for my anime. The animation itself is good. There's nothing necessarily mind-blowing like Akira, Ghost in the Shell, or, what was that, Jinro, the Wolf Brigade. That's another one with great animation, but it certainly holds up well for, something from that time period. And yeah, the tone is The tone definitely has some of that melodramatic delivery that often gets associated with anime of this period, and no dub, by the way. So there's that too. It's subs only because, well, unfortunately, this thing never got a release outside of the Japanese Laserdisc edition that came out in '88, which is damn shame. Because imagine if this had come out, if it had come out on VHS, chances are more people would know about it because it probably would have gotten a wider release, right? In spite of that, and all the changes from the original, I think this series is a pretty good companion piece to the book and the movie. It doesn't have the political philosophy of the former or the whole Imperial Guard versus Tyranid action from the latter, but it does have a unique interpretation of the source material without descending into mockery of its world or message that the movie unfortunately does. That works very well for its medium, along with probably the best depiction of Heinlein's powered armor suits we've got. Possibility also for Trader of Mars, but these ones I think really top off on those ones. I honestly wish this had really gotten that proper release outside Japan. Any release outside Japan, frankly, or even if it's now it would be now available on some streaming site now. It's nowhere to be found. I think there's a rights issue somewhere. As it is, you can find it both on YouTube and the Internet Archive. Links for both versions will be in the description. They come with their own subtitles and everything already done, so no problems there. If you're the kind of person who likes their military sci-fi with a touch of 80s weebery, I definitely recommend checking out the Starship Troopers OVA. And on that note, I have been Zero Sum. Thank you for watching. Would you like to know more?